All right, welcome back to Doctrines 3, the doctrines of angels, church, and end times. We're going to continue our discussion in eschatology, the doctrine of last things, by talking about hell. What is hell? When I talk about that, obviously that word is used in many contexts as a swear word or curse word, but we're talking about the very reality, the place that is hell as it's described in Scripture. Again, we can talk all day about what hell is not and how it's described or depicted in pop culture, but what I'm more interested in is what does the Bible say about what hell is and what is going on there, what happens to people who go to hell, and that kind of thing. First of all, there are several terms that are used to describe hell, that are translated hell in the Bible. First, I want to use the term Sheol, coming from the Old Testament, the Hebrew word Sheol. This is the Old Testament word that occurs about 65 times in the Old Testament, and it's translated several different ways. Translated by the English word grave or pit. Sometimes it's left untranslated and is just simply left Sheol, and sometimes it's translated hell. And the question is what is this Sheol, and is this hell that we understand? Is this what is this? What's going on with this word? So, without spending all the time in the video to do this, really would encourage you, if you have an opportunity, to open up your concordance, your Strongs or Youngs or whatever it is that you're using, maybe Blue Letter Bible, and open it up and type in the word Sheol, or look up the word Sheol or hell from the Old Testament, and look up every occurrence of that word in the Old Testament. There's 65, and it's quite an extensive study. But as you read through those verses, you start to see some patterns. You start to see something that maybe in the Old Testament, that their idea of hell, their idea of an afterlife, was not nearly as complete as our understanding in the New Testament. And this gets back to an idea that we talked about at the very beginning of our videos, the difference between biblical theology and systematic theology, the idea of there being less information in the Old Testament than is given in the New Testament. In the Old Testament, this term Sheol is not the fleshed out idea of hell that we see in the New Testament, even in the Gospels themselves. It's instead, the Old Testament believers did not necessarily believe in a separated afterlife of where good people go and bad people go. In the Old Testament, you find, as you look through all those references to Sheol, that all people go to Sheol, or the grave. It refers to the grave many times, and really ultimately is talking about the physical grave, that when I die, my body is going to be put in a grave. It may refer to also the place of the dead. Even in the book of Genesis, at the very beginning, Genesis chapter 37 and 42, Jacob used this term several times to describe where his sons were sending him. He says, "You're sending my gray hair down to Sheol. Why are you doing these things to me?" And talking about that he himself was anticipating going to the afterlife, going to a place of the dead. And in those places, he's talking not about the physical grave. They're talking about, in those passages, a place of consciousness after death, a place where they themselves will actually live for a time. Now, it's important to understand that in the Psalms and several other places, the Old Testament believer recognized that at some point they would be rescued from Sheol. That's what Psalm 16, 9 through 11 says, and several other Psalms here, where David recognized that his soul would be rescued at some point from Sheol, recognizing that he would raise from the dead, that he would no longer be in the grave. So very important there. But it's recognized that the unbeliever, the wicked, the evil people go directly to Sheol and are not anticipating any kind of rescue from it. It's also important to understand when we go back to the angelology that Satan himself will be cast into the depths of Sheol, that there's levels of Sheol, that Sheol itself has places of greater and lesser punishment, or greater or lesser degrees of reward even. And so this dominant focus of the Old Testament seems to be on the place where the bodies of people go, not necessarily where their soul will exist for all eternity. I typically translate this word, or speak of this word, as the place of departed spirits, not hell. In fact, even those places where some of the translations use the word hell to translate the word Sheol, I think they do so erroneously. It either should be translated grave or place of departed spirits, recognizing that this is not the eternal resting place or the eternal destination of wicked people, but rather where all people in the Old Testament believed go to when they die. You say, well, how is that? How do you explain then the difference between Old Testament and New Testament? Is this a completely different theology? Do we have a different understanding of the Old Testament than the New Testament? Absolutely not. And we'll explain that when we get to the Greek word here in a minute. Other words are used extensively in the Old Testament to emphasize that focus. The terms grave, kaber, rather than Sheol, used 71 times to describe grave or pit, the earth below. In fact, the word earth itself, all emphasize where the body goes upon death. Thus, the Old Testament gives us a picture of a typical Palestinian tomb, dark, dusty, with mingled bones, and where this poor, lisping, stammering tongue lies silent in the grave. All the souls of men do not go to one place, but all people go to the grave. So they recognize that their soul would not remain there, but that they would go there after they die. As to the destiny of the souls of men in an intermediate state, the Old Testament says very, very little, if anything at all. In fact, what we'll see when we get to corporate eschatology, we'll talk about the idea of resurrection. The book of Daniel tells us, Daniel chapter 12, verse 1, that God will raise both the good dead and the evil dead, those who are believers, those who are unbelievers, and some will be raised to eternal life, some will be raised to eternal punishment. Okay. Let's talk about the Greek word then, Hades. And this word, of course, if you know anything about Greek mythology, the god Hades, brother of Zeus, who is the god of the underworld, is not only named for the person who rules the underworld, but also the underworld itself is Hades. Now, the Bible does not use this term in terms of the underworld or even the god himself, the Greek mythological god, but rather Hades as a place, and that this place translates the Old Testament Hebrew word Sheol. In the intertestamental period, you have the translation of the Hebrew text into Greek, what's commonly called the Septuagint. Every time that word Sheol is used, the Greek word Hades is used to translate it. So we can equate these two terms, that Hades is the same as the Old Testament term Sheol. It's the place of departed spirits. It's the place that you go when you die, that both good people and bad people, believers and unbelievers alike, will go to Hades. New Testament term used to describe the afterlife is Hades, equivalent to the word Sheol. The Septuagint said this, but is almost always translated by the word Hades there. Hades is originally a proper noun named for the god. Again, I said all of this already. I shouldn't speak before I change the slide, get my words ahead of myself here. In the intertestamental period, there developed this idea, this thought, that there was two compartments of Sheol or Hades, that all people go to Hades or Sheol, but some go to a place of punishment, and some people go to a place of reward. Those who are believers go to a place of reward, while those who are unbelievers go to a place of punishment. And the righteous then were awaiting the resurrection of Christ, who then delivered them from Hades into God's presence. Ephesians chapter 4, verse 9 tells us this. It says that he descended into the lower parts of the earth, i.e. Sheol or Hades, the underworld, and he led captive a host of captives and took them with him in his ascension. And so it's very likely that what we're seeing here is a verification of that two-compartment theory. And of course, we see this also in Luke chapter 16, where Jesus is speaking about Lazarus and the rich man. All right. In the story of Lazarus and the rich man, Lazarus, who was a beggar in life, dies, and then the rich man dies, and both of them are carried away to Hades. It's important to understand that the term there is not hell, but the Greek word Hades. Not eternal death, but rather this place of departed spirits that all people were thought to go in the Old Testament. And Jesus confirms this two-compartment theory of Hades, where the rich man goes to a place of torments, Lazarus goes to a place of reward and bliss. He's in Abraham's bosom. Notice that I said this in the other video, that's not the name of the place. Instead, the name of the place is paradise. Notice when Jesus says to the man on the cross, "Today you will be with me in paradise," he does not say, "Today you will be with me in heaven," because Jesus didn't go to heaven when he died on the cross. Instead, his soul went to Hades, the grave, just like everyone else in the Old Testament. But instead, Jesus, in the passage just before this, we're talking about 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 19, says that Jesus went to Hades and he preached to the souls who were in Hades. What does that mean, that he preached to the souls who were in Hades? It meant that he went to the place of departed spirits. He went to the place of reward to those who were believers before death, and he said, "Let's go. I'm the one you've been waiting for. I'm the one you've been looking forward to." And he led captive a host of captives out of paradise, and in his ascension took them with him to heaven, to where now paradise itself, what used to be the good part of Hades, is now in heaven. It's in the third heaven. So the next time the word paradise is used in 2 Corinthians, when Paul talks about that, he says that he ascended to the third heaven. He ascended to paradise, which is in the presence of God, which is why believers today go to the presence of God. Okay? So we see these two different ways that the word Hades is used. It's used to describe a place that refers to punishment. That in the New Testament, particularly in the epistles, that term Hades is used to talk about eternal punishment, because that's where unbelievers now go. Only unbelievers now go to Hades. Whereas before the death, burial, and resurrection of Christ, everyone went to Hades. And so sometimes, particularly in Matthew and Acts, and then in the book of Revelation, death, the word Hades just simply refers to death, the place where all must go in the termination of life. And so you can see this differentiation in the New Testament. All right, let's talk about a word that actually is translated and should be translated hell, and that's the word Gehenna. Gehenna comes from the Greek word, or the Hebrew. It's a Greek word used, actually translated from Aramaic and Hebrew. That is the Valley of Hinnom, or sometimes referred to the Valley of Ben Hinnom. In this valley, which was just south of the city of Jerusalem, and I wish I had a map to show you on this. Then the valley just south of the city of Jerusalem is a place where they threw all of their trash. In fact, the gate that is to the south of the city of Jerusalem is called the refuse gate, or sometimes even the dung gate. As the city removed its trash from the city, it took it out that gate to the valley of Hinnom, where it would burn that trash, and the smells and the sights that are conjured up of a dump and place where they're burning refuse and burning trash, and even dead bodies, is what's depicted there of hell, a place where their worms shall never die, and their fire shall never be quenched. You can see the terms they're recognizing: a dump, a city dump where they're burning trash. Also, during the period of Second Kings, it was a place where Molech was worshipped, where they sacrificed children. So it adds that added horrible picture of child sacrifice, infant sacrifice, to go along with the place that had become the city dump. Jeremiah announced in Jeremiah 7 and 19 that the valley of Hinnom would be a place of God's judgment. The valley also became a place where refuse and dead bodies and animals and even criminals were burned. And so again, you see the picture here forming. So when Jesus uses the term hell, when he talks about being destroyed in hell, or he talks about going to hell, make sure that you check it or look it up in your Strongs to make sure that that word is Gehenna rather than Hades, because this is certainly a picture of eternal judgment, a place of fire, a place of pain, a place of torture that is and torments that is very real and very disturbing, and certainly not a place where someone would want to go. As a result, Gehenna became synonymous with eternal punishments and the fires of hell. It describes the punishment connected with the final judgment, punishment that has eternal duration, not a place of annihilation. It's a place of weeping and gnashing of teeth. And of course, there Jesus says, their worm shall never die, their fire shall never be quenched. Another word only used once in the entire New Testament is the word tartaru. 2 Peter chapter 2, verse 4. Here, this word is a place of the pit, or in fact, the name is classical. Actually, comes from classical mythology for the subterranean abyss in which rebellious gods and other such beings, such as the Titans, were punished. And so, kind of, this is where the fallen angels have been kept in chains in this pit, or in this abyss. It's very likely that what's thought here is when you talk about the two compartment theory of Hades, where you have a place of torment and a place of paradise, that there's a great gulf that affixed between them, a chasm that separates them, a bottomless pit is very likely where this place is thought to be. And this is a place where, according to 2 Peter chapter 2, that angels who had committed some horrendous crime, possible that it's connected to Genesis chapter 6. We talked about an angelology. We talked about that those angels, or those demons, had cohabitated with women and had children by them, that their punishment was to be bound in chains in this tartaru, or this abyss. Then the term abyss itself is used a couple other places, pit or abyss, meaning something that is bottomless. And again, also used for the prison for demons. In Luke, and again in Romans chapter 9, we see the abyss open up, and these demons coming out And it's possible that that's Satan who is the king over those demons, but the term used is Abaddon or Apollyon, Greek Apollyon, Hebrew Abaddon, meaning destruction. Very well could be the name of a demon, not Satan himself. But God releases these demons upon the earth during the tribulation. Certainly not a time that I'm going to want to be on this earth. We'll talk about that in a couple of weeks. At the second advent of Christ, then, Satan will be bound and confined in this abyss for 1,000 years. So again here, probably talking about Hades itself, only the bottom parts and the lowest parts of Hades. In fact, if you correlate Revelation chapter 20, which talks about being thrown into this abyss, and you correlate that with Ezekiel 28, which says that you've been cast from heaven and you've been thrown into the lowest parts of Sheol, it's very likely that this abyss and the lowest parts of Sheol or Hades are the same. All right, there's lots of other terms that talk about hell. The unquenchable fire, we talk about with Gehenna, a furnace of fire, outer darkness, eternal fire, the lake that burns with fire and brimstone. In fact, that's a term that we'll use more specifically to talk about eternal death, the lake of fire. We'll talk about that when we get to the judgments and the resurrections. There again, the lake of fire. Unbelievers will be cast into the lake of fire at the great white throne judgment, and there they will live in eternity in torments. Now, we could spend a lot of time talking about the value of, is there really eternal punishment? But what I want to do is in the discussion boards, I want you to really kind of grapple with that idea as you talk about it amongst one another. That's all we have for hell. Next video, we'll talk about heaven.